Hey, everybody, and welcome to Notes from the Underground. This is a podcast for people who love Jesus but have some real questions for Christianity. Here at Notes, we take a microscope to some of Christianity's thornier topics and people using a progressive theological lens and a socio-historical approach to studying the Bible. So if that sounds like you, come on in and have a seat. But buckle up, it might get bumpy. Folks, welcome back to Notes from the Underground. This is a podcast where we take a microscope to some of Christianity's thornier topics and people. I'm your host, Tiziana, Mom So Hard Severse.
How are you momming so hard?
Listen, if you want the Wi-Fi password, go clean your room.
I mean, did 3-year-olds actually want that? If they want their tablet to work.
Every single day of my life, my daughter wakes up and says, can we watch TV or something? She says, or something all the time. Mom, can we watch TV or something? Yeah. To my right, we have Rick the Podfather Welch.
Hey, how y'all doing? I haven't been in one of these in a while.
I know. I'm very excited to have you. And behind the glass, Rocket Man Andy Bishop. Wow. So,
I love
folks,
it.
The speedy one.
Yeah, this is a second part of our series on astrology and the Bible. And if you didn't listen to the previous episode, let's go ahead and do a quick recap because I left here last time and literally on the drive home, thought to myself, you know what? I need to double check some of the things that I said. And so we're going to give a quick recap.
You need to know that I listened to that.
Uh-huh.
And it was riddled with error. I'm just kidding. I'm messing with you. I'm just playing.
Funny.
But it was riddled with error. So here's the discussion, right? We're talking about astrology in the Bible, and we are talking about the Hebrew Bible and the Hebrew people, and we're talking about the story of Nativity in Matthew and how there's some astrological conversation happening and some astrological omens. And so then the question becomes, if modern Christians are like, dude, you cannot know your sign because that's the devil's work. How did Christians get there when the Jews didn't seem to have a problem with astrology? So the first step was proving that the Jews didn't have a problem with astrology. And we started with Daniel, who was a astrologer in Nebuchadnezzar's court after the fall of Jerusalem in 585, 586 BCE. He was an astrologer. He was an accomplished astrologer. And when Babylon fell to the Persians in 539 and Cyrus the Great took over the kingdom, Daniel continued, that's 45 years later, so he's probably like in his 60s. Daniel continued to be a major player in the new Persian court, and he was so influential and so important and so good at his job that he trained other Persians who had a specific class of magicians and astrologers who were called who've been translated into the Magi. And he trained those people, and he was so good at it, and he was so influential that they were able to continue to use astrology, the Magi, the Persians from the East, to use their astrological omens to find the birth of Jesus, to find the star that foretold the birth of Christ.
Right.
That was my argument. I made several mistakes, and I'm going to address them very quickly. If you didn't listen to that last episode, just, skip forward to like 20 minutes, because that's how long it's going to take me.
That's how long it's going to take you to fix your problem.
But if you did listen to that last episode and you walked away with some thoughts and you were like, oh, that's neat, let me just make sure that, oh, that's neat isn't about the stuff that's wrong. Okay.
Right.
Number one, I made a bold claim that Daniel didn't speak Aramaic, so when the hand appeared on the wall and wrote in Aramaic, that doesn't make sense. That's total bullshit. He was trained in the language of the Chaldeans.
Ooh, that's an interesting one,
He was trained in the language of the Chaldeans, and that was Aramaic. Come to find out. So when I said that the Jews didn't speak Aramaic until the 3rd century, that's correct, but it was the Jews back in Jerusalem. The Jews that were chilling in Babylon had learned Aramaic at that point. So there was this weird period of time where, like, yes, some things were in Hebrew, some things were in Aramaic, but it was like the 3rd century that Aramaic sort of supplanted Hebrew as the language within which things were written down. Okay, so that's mistake numero uno.
And what was the language that the Babylonians were accustomed to? So whenever this language was written on the wall, were they accustomed to Aramaic, or were they accustomed to something else?
They were. So I don't know why. So when they got shaky and were like, oh my gosh, what does this mean?
Yeah.
It's possible that they did not actually mean, let's get somebody who can read it. They're like, let's get someone who can tell us what it means.
Like, what is this omen?
Yeah, because the words there are in they're Aramaic words.
That's like Peniel,
yeah,
something. Yeah.
Right, Menekai or something like that. So, but again, I left here and I thought to myself, wait, hold on a second. Because sometimes what happens, have you ever seen the second Wizard of Oz? The second one. I know Andy has because we've talked about
Return
it.
to Oz?
Oh, yeah.
Yes, Return to Oz. It's
Yes.
creepy as all get
I
out.
really want to watch it again. Maybe
It's
I'll put it out
super
on the
weird.
theater outside.
Oh,
Yeah.
that'd be fun.
I love
Yeah.
that movie. There's a character in that film. His name's TikTok, and he's a giant brass robot.
Mm-hmm.
He has 3 winders, one that winds up his head, one that winds up his mouth, and one that winds up his body. And at some point in the show, his thinker winds down, but his talker keeps going. Sometimes that happens
It's
to me.
me.
Sometimes that happens. It's my ADHD. So I've like all these notes and they're scattered and they're all over. And like I said in the previous episode, I chase all these rabbits, but I'm not a historian. So sometimes I think I had a grasp on something. And then as I'm leaving, I check myself and I'm like, some of this is true. Some of this is opinion and speculation. Thank you for listening and speculating with us. Sometimes I'm driving home and I'm like, I'm going to double check that.
So we do our best to try to give you the right information, but that doesn't mean that we're perfect. It's up to you to go do your research. But we'll do our best, and I'm glad that you're willing to correct what was wrong.
It is still a weird book archaeologically because it is still the first part, like some parts of it are Hebrew and some parts of it are in Aramaic. Go and double check it yourself. I was about
That's
to
true
tell
in the
you
New
which parts
Testament
are which.
with Greek and Aramaic.
Right. But like that makes more sense.
Does it?
Yeah. Like because people were speaking them equally, but they weren't speaking Hebrew and Aramaic equally. Because some of the Jews back, it's
I gotcha.
It does still not make sense, but for me to say the reason it doesn't make sense is because Daniel wouldn't have spoken Aramaic. That in itself, that's just completely not true. So let's correct that. The language of the Chaldeans was Aramaic. Okay. Mm-hmm. All right. So there's like 1 or 2 other things. Oh, the other thing is Darius the Persian versus Darius the Mede. There were 2 Dariuses. There were 2. There was Darius the Great, and then there was Darius the Persian. Okay. Mm-hmm. Now, I was talking about how in chapter 5,
It's
Rick.
fine.
That was my seat. I apologize.
That doesn't matter.
Yeah.
They didn't.
Yeah.
They
A
probably didn't
likely
hear it.
story.
I dropped my bottle
Anyway.
cap, and I didn't want to spill all this water.
Why don't you just pull that stool closer to yourself while we're kind of
Grab
off
the
on
stool
a tangent?
specimen.
Yeah, get that stool specimen. So you can.
That's much better. Good idea. Thank you. And
Yeah.
that's why you're the brains of the outfit.
That's me. I can tell you. I can tell you where stools are.
I like the cup he's using, don't you?
Ooh.
Yeah, he's using the Burroughs cup.
That's my husband's favorite cup, by the way.
I use a Burroughs
It's the
cup
Burroughs
almost
of
every
Berea
day because
podcast cup.
these are exactly the right size.
They
for
are.
me.
They're perfect
Yeah.
for Keurigs.
Yeah, I love it. So I make this claim like that at the end of chapter 5, King Belshazzar is dethroned.
Mm-hmm.
We know that he was dethroned by Cyrus the Great, but the Bible says he was dethroned, and then Darius the Mede was placed in charge of the kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we have no extra biblical sources to support that.
Okay.
Okay, so the line goes like this: King Cyrus had both Persian and Median lineage.
Mm-hmm.
His dad, I believe, was Persian, and his mom was Median.
Mm-hmm.
He unites the 2 kingdoms, creates the Medo-Persian Empire. His heir is Cambyses. Okay.
Yes.
That's the Bahistun relief that I was talking about. It's Darius, the first Darius the Great, who is a Mede, who comes along, and he's King Cyrus's cousin because Cyrus's mother was a Mede. He comes along, and this is what the Bahistun relief tells us. The Bahistun relief tells us the story of how Cambyses was no longer the king of the Medo-Persian Empire, but how King Darius, the first one, became king. So that has nothing to do with the story in Daniel, right? It's a completely different story.
Mm-hmm.
Completely different story. And Xerxes and Esther have the son that we think that we would call Darius the First.
Right.
So that's what I'm saying. I'm like, oh, maybe Darius the Mede is actually Darius the Persian. Xerxes and Esther's son.
Well, it's not a big reach because they have
It's
the
not a
same
big reach.
name, and he's in a position to get
Except
power.
that Daniel would have been like 200 years old. That's the issue. The timeline,
I see.
and that's what happened. So I left here, and I thought, wait a second, timeline. And I went back to my original notes, and I looked at the lineages, and I looked at them again, and I did the math, and I was like, oh. Because if you think Daniel and his friends were exiled in 585, 586 BCE. Now listen, we don't know necessarily exact, right? Like these are approximate.
That's true of a
dates,
lot of
right?
things for them.
The BCE approximation of when Babylon destroyed Jerusalem,
Yeah.
that's pretty set. They actually have the day and the
day.
month.
Okay, right. Okay, well, never mind
So
then.
but you know that when that happened, but you don't know exactly in that time frame when Daniel was pulled out.
We don't know, right?
Or how old he actually was at the time. They know that they were children. Well, what does that mean?
Yeah, he could have been a little kid.
He still doesn't live to be 200, but...
Right. And so I think that that's the issue, is that I went and I was like, wait, hold on a second, because we're talking about King Cyrus the Great comes and trashes the empire and starts a whole new story. That is 539.
Yep.
And so 86 minus 39 is like 48.
Uh-huh.
So when chapter 6 starts to talk about the new kingdom and Daniel's position in the new kingdom, the fact that it uses the word satraps over the word presidents, it does signify, like Andy had said, new management, same staff.
Yep.
But there was also this influx of
which was really funny.
Of Persian
and right.
astronomers. Yeah, of Persian astronomers, because the other thing I said that astrology originated in Babylon. And what I meant, and I said it later correctly, what I mean is Mesopotamia, which is the area in between the Euphrates and Tigris rivers, which included Babylon and Assyria and all these other places. Now, that is not the same place as Israel over here in the Levant. That's
right.
the place that's along the Mediterranean.
The place you're describing is technically where the Garden of Eden's supposed to be.
Right. And
the Tigris Euphrates.
And the other thing I was talking about, the story I was talking about when I said splitting Tiamat's body, I remembered it in the car. It's the Enuma Elish.
Ah, yes.
It's the Enuma Elish, and it is not a Canaanite story. So the land of Canaan, quote unquote, that the Jews were supposed to inhabit, yes, some piece of it was actually Canaan, but there was also the Moabites, there was also the Edomites, the Ammonites. Egypt often just referred to that whole area as the land of Canaan. So sometimes I might say, oh, Canaan, the land of Canaan. I'm not necessarily talking about the piece just the Canaanites had, but like basically that whole place, they call it the Levant, that whole chunk to like that borders the sea, but the Mediterranean Sea. But you got to remember, and you guys can't see me, I'm like drawing with my hands over here like y'all are watching. You are absolutely not. The Fertile Crescent goes up from the Persian Gulf, right? It continues through Mesopotamia and then swings around to also include the Levant. This area we call the Fertile Crescent. Archaeologically, these people had similar languages. They had similar material culture, which means their pots and their fragments and their art. They had similar art. They were a similar people. They all intermingled. They all influenced one another. So when I say that astrology originated in Mesopotamia and Babylon and Assyria, they were all kind of doing it at the same time. And I do have a little bit more of the history of how that, because again, like I said, the Assyrians in 750 made astrology a state-sponsored religion, and that's when they started doing what we would call mundane astrology. At least that's what someone else called it. We need to get an astrologer in here and ask them their opinion.
Yeah.
So someone who actually knows this stuff. So that's when they started doing astrology, which is like looking for signs in the heavens to tell people what's going on politically or what political moves we should do. That would technically, I suppose, if you felt like it, be what the Romans and what the Star of Jesus was also all about.
Yeah, and I don't want to take you on a side note because I know you're still doing your correction, but there was one thing that was really just like welling up inside me the whole time I listened to your first episode. And it's the idea, like when you said that Israel should have no problem with astrology because Daniel was operating as an astrologer. Number one, I agree. Daniel is an astrologer, and he is, but there is something unique about Daniel in the story, which is he's seeking after God for the answers, not necessarily the stars. The star, right?
Yeah.
In Daniel, we're talking about Daniel now. So he's doing that. So there are all kinds of scriptures in the Old Testament where Israel shouldn't be messing with that stuff, right?
So you didn't even know that that's the next step, and now we're going to talk about it.
Oh, neat.
Because that actually kind
You're
of
welcome
like
for the
brings
segue.
me, that brings me to the end of my corrections. Okay. All right. Okay. If you didn't listen to the previous episode, at least hopefully that was entertaining. So we ended the previous episode with the statement, how is it that Daniel could be both an unapologetic worshiper of Adonai Elohim Hashem, right? How could he both be that and an observer of their laws first and still be an astrologer? Right? How can we have those two things be the same? So I think the next logical step, if you ask me, is to start from the top. Genesis.
Okay.
Let's go through some Hebrew scriptures and some archaeological evidence that might talk about what the Hebrew people, ancient Hebrews, did or didn't believe regarding astrology and regarding the stars, because this might help us understand the difference between Daniel's astrology and the astrology of the Babylons, the Assyrians, and so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
So Genesis 1:14-15 says, "And God said, let there be lights in the dome of the sky to divide the day from the night. Let them be for signs, seasons, days, and years, and let them be for lights in the dome of the sky to give light to the earth." And that is how it was. There's a separation between signs and seasons.
Mm-hmm.
So just like there's a separation between astronomy and astrology, I find that fascinating that there's supposed to be a difference between signs and seasons. And Rick, you did a big old giant episode.
I did.
And in Revelation, it uses the word sign,
Mm-hmm.
and it's the same thing, correct?
That's correct.
So we also see this word signs used later on in the Greek in the New Testament to sort of refer to astrological omens that kind of give you portents of things to come. So first and foremost, Genesis 1 says that when God was creating an ordered universe on purpose, with a plan and purpose, that the way the stars and planets were arranged in the sky was part of that plan.
Mm-hmm.
Psalm 8:3.
The Jew can't even start their calendar without it.
Right.
Their
Yeah.
calendar for the year begins with it.
With what? Wait.
With whenever they start their year,
Uh-huh.
like when they go for Passover,
Uh-huh.
so it's always the 14th of Nisan. But
Uh-huh.
whenever you go, when the reason why their calendar changes is because it's always based on what's
Oh, yeah,
going
that's
on in the
right.
heavenlies.
Yeah, that's
Their
right.
calendar changes.
Is it a moon calendar?
Yes.
Yeah, it's a moon calendar.
Well, and also, it's also...
But
an
they also use the stars. They also use the signs. Those signs are, and for seasons, like she said,
Right.
seasons, like when is the wheat harvest? When is
Yeah.
the barley harvest?
Right.
When is, like they looked to the skies for
That would-
those types of things.
That would make sense.
Which a lot of people did. It's really interesting because calendars changed.
Yep.
Calendars, like the calendar we use now, like the Gregorian calendar or whatever, that's not the calendars that people have used
It's a whack
throughout the
calendar.
history of time. Egypt used to do it months in tens and 10 weeks that were 10 days, like
Yeah.
because it makes more sense. It's,
13.
Yeah, the Babylonians actually have like their calendar system is really interesting and I think closer to what we use now. I think so. I remember watching a video about Babylonian calendars when I was in school, and it was fascinating at the time. I retained about 8% of it.
Yeah.
And I just told you all exactly what that 8% was.
Yeah.
Yeah. If there were 13 months, every month would have the same amount of days and start on the same day and end on the same day. Every month, if you started the first month on a Monday,
Yeah.
I've
every
watched
month
lots
would
of
start on a
fun
Monday.
YouTube videos about that.
It's not quite. You still get like leap years.
You
and
always
crap.
have the
It's
leap.
not perfect.
Nothing is designed, but they know. The thing is, they know.
Yeah, they know. They figured that out.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
so
That's what happens when you don't have TV and all you do is watch the sky.
Right. For sure.
precisely.
Yeah.
Right? Precisely. And like we talked about in the last episode, when you believe that the sky is also sort of like a newsletter that the gods are sending out to you to tell you what they want from you,
That's right.
you're going to be a little bit more invested. So I'm just going to read a series of verses. Psalm 147:4. He determines the stars and gives to all of them their names, which is different
Mhm.
than Adam. Adam gave to all the things on the ground their names, but God gave the stars their names.
That's good.
Psalm 8:3 is a psalm of praise attributed to King David. So it's a song of praise, and he says, "When I look at your heavens and the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars that you have established, what are human beings that you are mindful of them, mortals that you take care of them?" And in 19:1, he also says, "The heavens are telling the glory of God."
Yeah.
So this idea that maybe God made the earth and then put Adam here and was like, this is your domain, we don't see that in the star. Like God is in charge of the stars. God places the stars. God moves the stars. God has named the stars. And the glory of God is foretold in the stars.
Yeah.
Job, it gets even more specific. This part I thought was really fascinating. So in Job chapter 9, all right, Andy, and anybody else who doesn't really know the Bible, we don't expect that you come to this, having read the dang thing. Rich is funny.
He doesn't ever, unless I make him read it here,
Yeah.
which is so much fun.
I made him read it last time.
Sarita every once in a while will be like, "Do you want to read, Andy?" Ha ha ha, and then like not ask me to read. You're like, I don't burst into flames.
Don't hurt his feelings. He wants to read.
Yeah.
You might. I don't know. So, but Job is this story of this very righteous man, and he loses everything because God and Satan get into. That's like interesting.
Yeah. A
Satan,
Hasatan.
right? One of the heavenly. one of
Divine counsel.
one of the divine council. So
Also
like
fascinating.
The
goes out.
adversary. He's the adversary.
yeah, let's talk we could talk a whole lot about
Yeah,
that.
we did 5 parts of it.
Right, on the divine council?
Yep.
Oh, that was before my time.
It's early. Yeah, it's early on.
Did you include woman wisdom?
No, of course not.
Which you should have, because she says, I was there when the foundations of the earth were laid. That's in Proverbs. That would have been an interesting addition. So anyway.
Interesting that the word woman and laid is in the same sentence. That was a dirty joke. I'm just kidding. Dirty
Well,
for
it
me.
makes sense. Well, but I mean, that's going to be a whole other conversation.
You
So
can even
anyways,
delete that.
So Job loses everything. And then it's the story of he lays himself in sackcloth and ashes, and he starts accusing God, not accusing, but he's like, why have you done this? Show me where I messed up. I know who I am. I know I was righteous. What is going on? Which actually is the point. He was righteous.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why he was getting blessed. And Satan was like, yeah, but take away all of his toys to see what he does, which included his children. Don't even get me started. But his friends come to him one at a time, and they're like, you screwed up. Don't sit there and act like you're not a piece of shit. You know you are. Just admit it, So the structure of the book is friend accuses Job, Job defends himself. Friend accuses Job, Job defends himself. And then finally in chapter 9, God shows up and tells all the friends to shut their stupid mouths because they don't even know what they're talking
But
about.
everybody always forgets about Elihu.
It's funny because
Elihu's giving him excellent advice, and he introduces God to him. Why do people always forget about Elihu?
I don't know. That's a good question.
I don't think he's a bad guy.
And
he's younger than all of them.
And he's not one of the ones that God gives a hard time to.
He's not. It's
he's
the other
only
three.
one that he doesn't give a hard time to.
He's actually being introduced by Elihu, which I would really like to know what Elihu means.
Some
in
people
Hebrew.
suggest that it's because he was added later.
There again.
text.
Thanks a lot, Dan McClellan.
Thanks a lot, Dan McClellan. I literally live in fear that he's going to come for me. So Job chapter 9. So this is one of those moments, right? So God shows up and God's going to describe themselves. And I said this in the last episode. I'm really going to start trying to refer to God as the third person plural, first person plural, with they, that, because God is not an embodied spirit. God does not have a wiener or a vagina. But the people who were writing about God were male. And so they tended to write about God in their language.
Mm-hmm.
But man and woman created them, both of them. So anyway. So Jesus,
you
God
just said
shows up.
God does not have a wiener, and you obviously don't know that there's this whole thing in the Hebrew where it talks about the train that goes through the temple is actually the size of his penis. You ever heard this before?
What?
Yeah. So there's a whole thing about this. The women talk. There's this woman in Florida. She is a Hebrew scholar out the wazoo, and she talks about it, and she's very open about it. Yeah.
Shoot that my way.
I'll send it to you.
Oh, I want to know. That is very
Listen,
interesting.
I'm not trying to make any waves, but evidently it's in the Hebrew, and even the Hebrews know it. It's just
well, and I think
we're a purity culture. We don't want to talk about that.
Yeah, we're gonna go off on a tangent or whatever. But as usual,
Sorry.
That's amazing.
But you also
Please
have.
send it to me as
I
well.
will.
Yeah, you also have these Jews, right? Who have God stops referring to themselves in the first person plural after the book of Genesis, right?
Mm-hmm.
In Exodus, the people cry out and God remembers his people. And that's where we start seeing God in the singular. And God shows up in the first person plural, not just at creation. God also shows up in the first person plural in the building of the Tower of Babel. God says, if they build this tower, they will become like us. So part of this also, in terms of the evolution of the Hebrew people, has to do with, and this is not I am 99% confident that I remember this correctly from my Hebrew Bible studies course. So hopefully I'm not having to retract this one. But because the Hebrew people, Abraham, started out in this Levant, in the Fertile Crescent, where there was all these interminglings, every single other culture had multiple gods, and they had male and female deities. Mm-hmm. And those male and female deities had sex and made other deities and made people and had things that happened. Right.
Yep.
So there's a concept, there's a query that as the Hebrew people's thought process about their God evolved and changed, they stopped thinking about their God as a plurality and started thinking about their God as a singularity.
Mm.
And so that's kind of why we see literally every single other culture have that balance between feminine and masculine, but it's kind of removed at some point from their thinking and the way that they talked. Yeah. And again, we go into divine counsel, right? But who's to say that that divine counsel didn't include like a feminine energy? Like, why is it all masculine energy? Who said it was? Because again, Proverbs says woman wisdom. I can't remember what it is. It's like Proverbs 6, maybe? It's this whole thing. Woman wisdom calls out. She says, I was there with God in the beginning. I was there when we laid the foundations together, all this other stuff. And so I don't like...
Wisdom is known by her children.
Exactly. Yeah.
There's always the feminine when it comes to wisdom.
I'm just going to have you say that again, sir.
There's always the feminine when it comes to wisdom. Until Jesus was born, then he was wiser than anyone. So it got given back to the men. Sorry, pal.
It got given back to the men with their superior brains. Yeah, that can focus on one thing.
We just picked up swords and threw rocks and made the women bow. That's what we did.
As a person who wants to really know this, like I read these texts and I look for her. I look for the divine feminine because God created both. God is both. God is not just a masculine energy. But God
is a spirit, not a man.
But
they give him a masculine voice, but he's a spirit and not a man.
But I think that God has a masculine voice because God's words and things have been recorded. Like this God, Elohim, they were recorded by men who were naturally going to hear that, you know. But I mean, even Jesus says, "Oh Israel, how I've longed to gather you under my wings as a mother hen gathers her chicks."
That's right.
And Moses makes I can't remember exactly, but didn't Moses make some comment at some point about like, I'm not supposed to nurse these people like you do? Because I'm not their mother. They're not at my teat like they are you.
Right.
So, you know, there's also these little kind of references to this idea. So anyway, that's why I want to try to get better at referring to God as they. First of all, just to, you know, just fuck with people.
Yeah.
Because if you have a problem with that, like if it's difficult for you to hear God as not a man, then I think you might want to sit with that. And ask yourself, why is that so challenging?
Why does he need a wang? Is he out there getting it?
Well, apparently not, because God did not have a female consort, which in every of the other cultures that God did. Because in this particular culture, and that's because in this culture, Israelite is God's consort, right? Mm-hmm. Like Israelite is God's portion. Israelite is God's.
Didn't early versions of the Bible have Lilith as his, or is that just misinformation that I've heard?
That's pseudepigraphal.
That's
right.
pseudepigraphal.
I'm just saying it is early writings, yes.
But early writings exist, yeah.
No, of course. And there was a Lilith. That was technically the first wife of Adam.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's right.
Was it?
Yes.
I thought God
That's
had.
right.
There was
an Asherah.
Asherah.
You think an Asherah.
Oh,
or
yeah,
Ashtaroth.
Asherah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they found some archaeological evidences in undeniably Hebrew archaeological sites, like little carvings of like necklaces that probably would have been worn of Asherah. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they were worshiping Asherah, but it means that they were recognizing they needed, like maybe they were worn by women, especially during childbirth. You know, they recognized that they needed a mother's help at times. And without a very clear feminine depiction of that in their own culture, they were, again, rubbing shoulders with and borrowing. The problem came when they started worshiping these other deities, right? That's problem came when they started treating these other deities, these idols made of stone. Do not worship idols made of stone and wood. They started treating those idols as if they were gods and had in themselves inherent power.
I'm glad we did this little aside because I don't mean to pull you back to your original study, but it's a great way to do it because that is really what I asked you to start with, which was, and we just went on this giant rabbit trail about God and, you know, the feminine. And the reality is that we really only know a fraction of what's going on in these ancient cultures. We only know a fraction of it, you know? And so, but you make a great point. It was the way that the Hebrew people looked at it is, look, you've got all these many gods and you have this one God that tells you to worship the stars and you have this one God that tells you to go over here and be fertile or whatever it might be. Mm-hmm. And we're saying that we have one, Hashem, he's the one. And everything that comes and stems from him comes from him and only he is the one that gets our worship. So we listen to him in all things. Right. And he's the one that made all the stars. Therefore, you go to him, not the stars.
So back to Job chapter 9, God says it himself. That he places the stars.
Yes.
And that he calls them by name. So
exactly.
let's read that. He says, God is talking about himself. He is wise in heart and mighty in strength. Who has resisted him and succeeded? He's talking about himself.
Right.
God's weird. Who? He's like
If he
Bob
didn't
Dole
say it,
talking
would you
about
know it?
himself, Bob
If he
Dole.
didn't say it, would you
Yeah.
know it?
So he's talking about God, who is wise and heart. He's talking about himself. He moves mountains and they do not know it.
Bob Dole.
Yeah.
I just got it.
Yeah.
That's an
When
old reference.
When he overturns them in his anger, who shakes the earth out of its place and its pillars tremble? Who commands the sun and it does not rise? Who seals up the stars? Who alone stretched out the heavens and trampled the waves of the sea? Who made the Bear and Orion and the Pleiades and the chambers of the south? Who does great things beyond understanding and marvelous things without number?
Yeah, so there's your constellations.
Now, but let's be clear. They did not use the words Pleiades, the Bear, and Orion. No. They had Hebrew words that they used, Kessel and Kima. And we assume that's what they mean because here's the thing. All of the constellations and the sun and the moon and the stars, they are the same constellations that everybody's looking at in this group of people. Not in the South, Southern Hemisphere,
So
they're different.
You didn't get the word Mazzaroth?
I'm not there yet.
Oh, but that's where it's at. Is in Job 9.
That's
Sorry,
in 38.
I jumped ahead.
It's in Job 38.
Oh, that's 38. I'm sorry. When you mentioned the bear, I thought, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
My bad.
So Job chapter 9 is Job. That's not God talking about himself in the third pillar. This is Job talking to his friends saying, who can do all these things? It is God. God's not talking about himself in the first person. Sorry, this is what happens. See, this is why I end up going back and correcting myself because I'm looking at like 20 pages worth of notes.
Right.
And I'm reading some pieces of it and some parts of it. And then just now when you said Job 30, I was like, no, that's Job 38. That's when my brain went, no, dummy. Hold on, dummy.
Yeah.
Job chapter 9 is not God talking about himself. And I'm like, oh, yeah, that's right. Sorry, excuse me. Job chapter 9 is Job talking to his friends.
Yes.
And talking about God and describing God in this way, which includes this understanding that God is placing these constellations in the sky for a reason. Why would Job even care? I understand that the sun and the moon and the stars like affecting your planting season, but to say that all of these constellations and the chambers of the south, we don't even know what that means, seals up the stars, that often sounds like sealing up scrolls, who hides wisdom in these scrolls, but you need to be privy to this relationship to read them, right? Job is saying all this stuff about God. And keep in mind, Job is like patriarchs old.
Yeah.
That story is patriarchs old. Abraham, who was probably more closely associated with these ancient cultures, because Abraham, what do they think? Like 1500 BCE or something like that?
Well, yeah, we've had an archaeologist on the show that we kind of go back and forth. They think 1500 based on what we understand in the Bible, but didn't he say it was like around 1000 BCEs when he thinks he was actually there?
I don't recall, but fascinating episode
Craig Olson,
if anybody wants to go
Craig
I'd
grab
love to
that.
go look at that.
Testimony.
It's good.
But here's the thing. The oldest archaeological evidence that we have regarding astrology is from the 2nd millennium BCE in Mesopotamia. So obviously Abraham and Job, obviously all these people understood astrology and as a way to discern the will of God. It's just that Job is making the bold claim that it's the one God, Hashem, that does all of that, rather than the planets, suns, moons, and stars themselves being gods.
Yeah, they were
Right?
all gods
He makes
named
the
for
he
gods.
makes the distinction. He makes the distinction. And that's sort of the beginning of what I'm talking about, which is how Daniel could both worship God and not only understand, but be a skilled astrologer, a skilled use of astrology. Then we go on to Job 38. And this is the part of the story where the Lord shows up and answers Job. Right. So I'm just going to correct that. And also, Lord, I apologize for misrepresenting you. Please forgive me in Jesus' name. Amen. So this is the part where God shows up and God's like, can you bind the chains of the Pleiades or loose the cords of Orion? Can you lead forth the Mazzaroth in their season? Or can you guide the bear and its children? Now that's the NRSV version.
Yeah.
So I read the New Revised Standard Version. And I read the HarperCollins Jewish Study Bible. The reason I use that Bible is because it contains information regarding Jewish culture, and it's a study Bible that uses a lot of archaeological evidence and things like that. They didn't translate that word. They leave that word Mazzaroth.
They do.
They don't translate it. Now, other translations, like the New King James or whatever, they're going to translate it as constellations. But there's another translation that says, can you tie up the cords of Pleiades or loosen the belt of Orion? Can you lead out the constellations of the zodiac in their season or guide the bear and its cubs? So that word Mazzaroth, it doesn't really show up anywhere else in the Bible, right?
I think that's the only place. Yeah.
And so again, people translate it to constellations, but what I just read, can you lead out the constellations of the zodiac? That's the complete Jewish study Bible written by people who actually friggin' speak Hebrew.
So I did a lot of research on that word a long time ago, and that's, from what I understand, that's what is kind of being understood. It's being understood is that it's the zodiac.
So let's talk about the zodiac. What in the world is a zodiac? Do you even know? Let's talk about it.
I mean, I know some, but I don't.
So what exactly is a zodiac? The zodiac is a belt-shaped loop that extends about 8 degrees north and south of the ecliptic, which is the path that the sun appears to take around over the course of a year as we orbit it. Okay, that's what that is. And within that zodiac belt, there are 12 constellations, the moon, and the brightest planets. As the Earth orbits around the sun over the course of the years, these 12 constellations, the moon, and the brighter planets change position relative to one another. And these paths of these constellations and the planets and the moons and such, right? This constitutes what we refer to as astrology. So you can actually believe in the zodiac as a scientific reality because it is.
Yes.
It's a path that all of these 12 constellations follow over the course of a year. Astrology would suggest that these paths have information that's useful to us as humans. And what I'm suggesting is the Hebrews also thought that. They thought there was information embedded within the traveling stars that were important and relevant to their lives, right?
They absolutely did.
Yeah. And this is, again, what you're talking about in Revelation. You talked about, and I went back and listened to it and took a lot of notes. So if you don't remember, you talked about Revelation 12 and how it's talking about when the sun is over the maiden's head and the moon's under her feet. You're saying that that's the sign of Virgo.
That's right.
And that what they're describing there is a certain astrological conjunction of planets and sun, moons, and stars that is unusual and that foretells the birth of Christ.
Yes.
So actually several really interesting, striking planetary conjunctions did take place within this 10-year chronological period of when he was born. So the year of Jesus' birth is uncertain. We don't know for certain sure, right? But it's thought to lie somewhere between 4 and 6 BC.
Yep.
So
BCE.
BCE, sorry, forgot the E. A triple conjunction in early 6 BC in which Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn stood at the points of a triangle with sides several degrees long has also been mentioned as a possible explanation. And then prior to that, for 8 months in 7 BC, Jupiter and Saturn were within 3 degrees of each other. And then several years later, on June 17th, 2 BC, the bright planets Venus and Jupiter would have appeared to observers in Babylon to have merged just before setting in the general direction of Bethlehem to the west. So we don't know exactly when he was born, but let's just be clear. There was a ton of really interesting astrological things happening. And I would be very curious to hear an astrologer talk about what these conjunctions are and what they mean, because astrology is so much more complicated than what's your sign.
Yeah.
We reduce it to that.
We're
all
really
the time.
talking about more than just what people would call their horoscope. We're talking about, what a lot of it, what we would call astronomy today or astronomical things is mingled in with that astrological of the past.
Right. And that's also because I did listen to a handful of things that were just the history itself of planets and of the zodiac that's building and stuff together. And there was this period of time where the earliest, what would be called your natal chart. So your
Natal
individual
chart?
birth chart. Yeah, it's called your natal chart.
Okay.
And essentially what it is a snapshot of all of these zodiacs and planets that's taken of the sky relative to the place and time that you were born. So in order to really understand your chart, you have to know when you were born and where you were born. And so it's as if you took a snapshot of the heavens, and different constellations will have a certain level of influence over certain areas of your life, or could potentially guide you in the direction of what might be your natural tendencies that you're born with, which is different from like, oh, the moon is right here and the sun is right here. And so that means that it's time to go to war.
Right.
That is astrology related to the world and the way the world works. And then there's natal astrology, which happens a little bit later from what I understand.
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking around trying to find those notes.
I've often wondered, like, so the sign within the zodiac, you've got 12, right, signs within the zodiac, and one of them being Virgo, let's say. And Virgo's holding a wheat stalk.
Right.
And why is that? Because that's the time of the wheat harvest, right?
Yeah.
So during the wheat harvest, if you have children that are born during that time, then you might have kids that eat particular types of foods when they're born in that particular type of time, or 3 months later or 6 months later, foods that affect you.
Sure.
You know, drinks that affect you. Like, there's all kinds of stuff going on, and
I've
they
always
link it.
thought, you know, obviously, like, I'm not so sure that the stars themselves determine things, but certainly when you were born is going to have a pretty significant effect on your life. And,
Sure.
and that's just a couple of the ways.
Exactly. I mean, if you were born in, and it's, again, if
you're
it's the wheat
born
harvest.
Midwinter,
Yeah.
that's a different life than somebody that's born
it's a lot darker than
in
normal.
March
and
or April. Yeah.
They also have, you know, you could also say something about your birth order.
Mhm.
Just because you're the middle child doesn't mean you're going to behave certain ways. But
Frequently.
we can pretty much,
Mine did. Mine behaved a certain way, all right.
Yeah. I get the weekly coupons from Food Lion in my inbox.
Yeah.
Okay. That doesn't mean you know exactly what I'm going to eat this week.
Mhm.
But if you know what my children eat, you can look at that thing and pretty much determine what's going to go in my buggy.
Right.
Right. They're not set in stone,
Mhm.
but they're influences.
There
They're,
you go.
Right. And it didn't used to be that. But see, the thing is, it didn't used to be that way.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't used to be that way. So what happened when Alexander conquered the entire free thinking world
Mm-hmm.
and everybody started speaking Greek is that the Egyptians, who had their own kind of astrology, and the Babylonians and the Mesopotamians, who had their own kind of astrology, the Mesopotamian people they were expert astrologers, right? They are the ones that came up with the 12 signs of the zodiac. They are the ones that started like kind of figuring out these certain things that affected certain things. Now, the Egyptians had a different kind of astrology. It included like houses and nodes and all these other things. So when everybody started speaking Greek, they started talking to each other. And that is when the astrology that we know and use today coalesced.
In Greek. In
Yeah.
Greece.
And here's the thing. I've heard people say that, like, you know, these are Greek names, Mars, and they're Greek gods and all this other stuff. Maybe that's how it got translated. But these planets were planets, and they were the same planets and the same constellations that the Hebrews are talking about. So who cares if it's the wrong, like the language? And here's the other thing. Just because the Greeks or just because the Egyptians or just because the Babylonians attributed these stars, these constellations, and these planets to gods and started worshiping them as if they were God, that doesn't mean that was true. It just means that was their interpretation. I've listened to some really wild TikToks and some really wild videos about how Satan is in charge of the universe and demons are the ones that are in these constellations. My Bible doesn't say that.
Mm-hmm.
My Bible, the Hebrew Bible that I read, says God placed those there. God's in charge of the seasons. And God themselves says in Job, I lead out the zodiac in its season. I do that, right? So that argument, if you're wandering around asking yourself, is it okay? Is it bad to look at my astrological natal chart and look for possible influences or advice because you think demons are in charge of all of that? My Bible doesn't say that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what your Bible says.
I've never heard that.
But, brother, you didn't grow up fundamentalist Christian.
No, and that's the thing. That's why these things are so uncomfortable. I mean, for me too. I mean, you can feel it. It's palpable, because I've been trained so long.
Yeah.
But I used to love, little side note here. I used to love to go like read the horoscope and just see like where it was landing.
Oh yeah.
And a lot of people in my family are like really into that. Like I go to do something and they're like, well, of course you do that. You're a Taurus, and you're like,
right.
What does that mean? Like what, but they have all these things.
The thing is, the more that I've studied, the more I realize how kind of like reductive that is.
Yeah.
Because we all have all the constellations somewhere in our lives. And that might be your sun sign. That's my sun sign's Leo.
Yeah.
And people who know me are like, oh, yeah, of course you're a Leo, right?
Yeah.
But my
You're
moon,
So catty.
but my moon sign is in Taurus. We need to get an astrologer. That's
Yeah.
what I'm saying. Because we have a lot of questions and we have a lot of like, layman's knowledge, but we
Yep.
don't have a lot of actual knowledge. And my understanding, because here's the spoiler alert, everyone, I've had my chart worked up.
Oh, no.
I have had my natal chart done.
Yeah.
I did it when I was like 36 out of curiosity. And that's when I realized how different it is, like how different it is. Like my natal chart, like I have my Virgo is in Libra, right? Which Virgo is the planet that kind of governs how you love or something of that nature.
Mm-hmm.
And so, my husband is a Virgo. And if you just like Google love relationships or whatever, what's going to work,
Yeah.
apparently Virgos and Leos are like a terrible match.
Yeah.
But my Virgo is in Libra. My husband's Virgo is in Libra, which means we love the same way. And my moon is in Taurus, which is kind of more your emotional makeup. And his moon is in Taurus. So of course I could bind myself to the weekly coupons that come in my inbox from Food Lion,
Yeah.
and only buy what the coupons tell me to buy. Or I could use my friggin' brain and I can pray and I can let the Lord help me make decisions. And then later on, when I learn this about my astrological chart and my husband's astrological chart, I go, oh, Lord, you knew what you were doing, didn't you?
Yeah. Exactly. I mean,
You know what you were doing, Lord?
yeah. I mean, I like to do the same thing at a Chinese restaurant. When you look at the little Chinese signs, and try to figure
Oh,
out what
yeah.
was your year. And it's
Oh,
like,
yeah.
oh, I'm a rabbit
I'm a
and I'm a
schnick.
bull.
Which again is a completely different zodiac, right?
Of course, totally
that's a
different.
completely different
Totally
kind of
different.
astrology.
Yep.
And I said this on the last episode. But what we are talking about is Western astrology.
That's right.
The one that uses the
Yeah.
concept that we are using, and this is the history of it. This is where it came from. Now, I would be remiss in my study if I did not also read Deuteronomy 18:10-14. There
ready,
must not
folks.
be found among you anyone who makes his son or daughter pass through the fire. A diviner, a soothsayer, an enchanter, a sorcerer, a spellcaster, a consulter of ghosts or spirits, or a necromancer.
Yeah.
The Bible tells us that.
Now, within that, if you read it in the King James Version, it actually says astrologer.
Yeah,
Oh,
Did
is
you know that?
it sure does.
Is that do we know if that follows the original language at all, or is that added, or
It just means stargazer.
Yeah.
It literally means stargazer. But the point of the stargazing is for divination.
yeah, for But what I'm saying is, do we know that translation necessarily accurate, or is that added?
It probably is accurate because astrology was a big part of the where. So here's the thing, right? God's about to overthrow a bunch of people and then put the Israelites in their space. Because Deuteronomy, in the history of the Jewish nation, they have come out of slavery. They've been wandering around the desert. They have discovered the land that they're going to inhabit. And then Deuteronomy is Moses's like final farewell before he shuffles off this mortal coil, right?
Yes.
And in that, there's a lot of laws and all this. There's also Moses giving his people advice, right? And there should be found among you none of these people. We talked about this before. It's God making sure that as his people, their people, as the people of Hashem, begin to intermingle with all these other cultures, these people that belong to Hashem don't forget that they belong to Hashem and start doing all of the things that these other people do, which we've discussed. Those people that were doing this, divination, soothsaying, contacting the dead. First of all, God doesn't say it doesn't work. God just says don't do it. Because if you go look at Saul and the story of the witch of Endor, Saul needs to consult Samuel, who has shuffled off this mortal coil. So Saul goes to the witch of Endor, and she actually does bring up Samuel.
Mm-hmm.
And Samuel has a whole conversation. So God doesn't say it doesn't work. God just says don't do it. And
That's right.
and so these what God is saying to his people, it's so hard. It just keeps referring to him as him. Maybe I should just refer to God as she every now and again just to make it interesting, since I can't use they more consistently. So what God's saying to his people is, you're going to be impressed by all these things because they're real and they work, but don't do it because these people are doing these things out of fear, out of anxiety. Because again, in the story of the Enuma Elish, which is a Babylonian, Mesopotamian creation story. Human beings are created after the earth is made. So Marduk, I can't remember the specifics of the story, but there's a big friggin' battle, and Tiamat, who's like the queen of heaven, she is ripped in half, and her body becomes the earth. And that becomes, her legs become the Tigris and the Euphrates, and then what's in between them becomes the earth. And there's some really beautiful pictures of all that, but some really pretty art. But then people are created because Marduk, who like won the big war, is like, let's make these guys slaves.
Right. Yes.
And so and even if like you read in Greek culture, we've talked about this. If your concept of the gods is angry, mean people who have created you for slavery and they're out to get you and they want to hurt you, then you are going to approach these particular behaviors and activities with a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety, and you're going to be asking for guidance from these gods that you're actually really like terrified of.
Yep.
Yeah. And so, but if you are a Hashem worshiping Jew, you have a relationship with your God that's loving and kind, and you might be asking the same questions, and you might even be using the same tools as Daniel did, but you're not going to have fear as your impetus. And you're not going to have like, what's going to happen to me as your impetus. Because if you have a relationship with God, if you have a relationship with Jesus Christ, you know what's going to happen to you. Your end is secure, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you have a question, you can just go directly to God and ask. But it might just be that the tool God uses to explain this to you is astrology, because that is a tool that God created for our purposes, at least according to the Hebrews. As a matter of fact, there are 3rd and 4th century Jewish temples with the zodiac as mosaics on the floor. That's a thing that we have archaeologically.
Yeah. Derek Lambert from Myth Vision was over there, and he actually filmed it. You can see those mosaics on the floor.
Yeah.
That doesn't necessarily mean that it was a good thing, though.
In the Dead Sea Scrolls, you have the zodiac of physiognomy and the zodiac calendar in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So the Jews also had these other books that used the zodiac to predict certain things and talk about certain things. They said that the zodiac, the physiognomy one, it's like if you're born under these signs, you're going to have these physical traits.
Really?
It's really interesting, yeah.
And that's from the 1st century.
And that's from the 1st century, because the Dead Sea Scrolls date from 1 CE, right? 1st century. That's another thing I did wrong in the last episode. I got my BCEs and my CEs all crossed, and I said them wrong. Okay.
If you just say BC and AD, you wouldn't be a problem.
Well, no, I said 3rd century, and then I said from like 3 BCE to 2 BCE. That's not true. The 4th century is 400 BCE to 300 BCE. So starts with 400 and then goes to 399, 398. I said it wrong. That was wrong. 6th century from 600 to 500 BCE. That's the Deuteronomy prohibition of these things, because God is like, these things actually work, but I don't want you to do them because these people are doing these things in the names of their own gods.
Right.
And they're doing these things out of fear, and they're doing these things to try and like figure out what they're supposed to do in their lives, but I'm just going to tell you what I want you to do in your lives, right? So then we have Isaiah 47, 13 through 14. And actually, I want to go ahead and read the first 14 verses of that chapter. So I want to read Isaiah. Isaiah 47 is titled The Humiliation of Babylon.
Yes.
Okay. So Babylon was eventually overthrown and defeated by Cyrus the Great. Cyrus the Great sent the Jews back home. This prophecy is from Isaiah, basically talking about how that's going to happen. So it says, "Come down and sit in the dust, virgin daughter of Babylon. Sit on the ground without a throne, daughter of Chaldea. For you shall no more be called tender and delicate. Take the millstones and grind meal. Remove your veil, strip off your robes, uncover your legs, pass through the rivers. Your nakedness shall be uncovered, and your shame shall be seen. I will take vengeance, and I will spare no one. O Redeemer, the Lord of hosts is his name, is the Holy One of Israel." So he says all this stuff, and he's kind of like really gets mad at them. And then he says, "You are wearied with your many consultations. Let those who study the heavens stand up and save you. Those who gaze at the stars and at each new moon predict what shall befall you. See, they are like stubble. The fire consumes them. They cannot deliver themselves from the power of the flame. No coal for warming oneself is this, no fire to sit beside. Such to you are those with whom you have labored, who have trafficked with you from your youth. They all wander about in their own paths. There is no one to save you." So here we see God attacking, again, because we talk about this, it's the story of the God of the Jews fighting the God of the Babylons.
Mm-hmm.
So here what we see in Isaiah is God is saying, your version of astrology, which is trying to predict this static future and like figure out how to get away from things. Like, that's not how this works. My signs tell you what's happening and you can't escape it because I'm in charge. That's the story. And so I know it's like a little bit hair splitty, but from an ancient Hebraic cultural standpoint, you're talking about all these people that rubbed up against each other. Abraham was from the land of Ur, right?
Yep.
A Chaldean city.
That's right.
Right. So he's from this place and he understood astrology. Everybody that wrote in these Bible books understood astrology. Everybody in the entire Fertile Crescent understood astrology. The difference, and this is the answer to our question that we opened this episode with, how is it that Daniel could be both a very skilled astrologer and a worshiper of the one true God?
Mm-hmm.
Okay? This is how. Because the difference is that when Daniel was reading the stars and studying their movements and knowing that they were portents of things to come, he knew they were portents of things to come from the one true God. He wasn't treating those stars and planets as if they were gods in themselves.
Right.
He wasn't worshiping those stars and planets. He wasn't asking people to worship those stars and planets. He wasn't begging those stars and planets for favorable futures.
Right.
In his mind, they're instruments of God.
In his mind,
God.
they are instruments of God. And in every Hebrew mind, they're instruments of God. Because we've read in the text the way that the Hebrews describe the creation of the heavens, which is the works of God's hands. And listening to Job, how God says, I lead out the zodiac. I lead the bear and Pleiades. I tell the sun to stop. I'm in charge of it all. So the question then becomes, how did we go from this place where the Jews and the ancient Jews were perfectly fine with astrology and its use so long as you were not worshiping the instruments of astrology, to Christians saying, you can't understand, you can't know your zodiac at all. That's the work of the devil. So that's next time on Notes from the Underground.
Ah.
Yeah.
So you're going to tell us.
Great job.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Good close.
That was. I really like that. That's good.